Maria worked as a waitress at the local diner, a small, cozy spot nestled on the corner of Main Street. She had been there for years, trying to make ends meet. Life had not been kind to her. She was a single mother to two young children, Sophia and Lucas, both under the age of 10. Maria's husband had passed away a few years ago, leaving her to juggle a full-time job with the responsibilities of raising her kids on her own. Her days were long and filled with exhaustion. Mornings were spent getting the kids ready for school, making sure they had everything they needed, and sending them off with a kiss. Then it was straight to the diner, where she worked until late at night. Her tips, though not bad, were never enough to cover all the bills. But Maria never complained. She didn't have time for that. She had learned long ago that there was no room for self-pity. Every penny she earned was for her children's future, and that's what kept her going. On this particular day, Maria was busy as usual, weaving in and out of the tables with her apron tied tightly around her waist. The diner was bustling with customers, regulars and newcomers alike. She smiled at everyone, always polite, always kind. But she was feeling especially worn out today. Her feet ached from the long hours, and her mind was heavy with thoughts of unpaid bills and a car that was beginning to show signs of giving up. As Maria walked past the booth by the window, she noticed an elderly couple sitting together, their hands gently clasped across the table. They had been coming to the diner for years, always sitting in the same spot, near the window where they could watch the world go by. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson had silver hair and bright, kind eyes. Despite their age, they always looked happy, always shared a joke or two, and never made a fuss. Maria had served them countless times before, and they always left her a decent tip. She knew them well enough to feel that they were kind-hearted souls, but today something about them seemed different. Their smiles were softer, their eyes a little sadder. Maria approached their table with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. What can I get for you today?" Mrs. Patterson looked up and smiled, though her eyes seemed to carry a quiet weight. "We'll have the usual, Maria," she said, her voice gentle. "Thank you, dear." "Of course," Maria replied, jotting down their order. As she turned to walk away, she heard Mrs. Patterson call after her. "You're a hard-working young woman, Maria," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope you know how much we appreciate you." Maria paused, a little taken aback by the sincerity in the older woman's voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot." With a smile, she headed to the kitchen to put in their order. It was a simple one, 2 cups of coffee and a couple of sandwiches. But Maria put extra care into preparing their meal, as she always did for her favorite customers. As she returned with their food, she noticed Mr. Patterson looking a little frail. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up his cup, and there was a slight pause in his speech as he thanked her for the coffee. Maria felt a pang of concern, but didn't want to pry. She had learned long ago not to ask too many questions. "Is everything all right, Mr. Patterson?" she asked, her tone gentle but curious. He smiled weakly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're doing fine, Maria. Just getting older, you know." He chuckled softly, but Maria could tell there was more behind the words. "Take care of yourself," Maria said, her voice sincere. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to let me know." The couple nodded, and with that, Maria returned to her work, trying not to let her concern for them cloud her focus. But she couldn't help stealing glances at their table throughout the afternoon. There was a quiet sadness about them that she couldn't shake. Later in the evening, as the diner began to quiet down, the Pattersons finished their meal and prepared to leave. Mr. Patterson stood up slowly, his knees creaking, and placed a hand on his wife's shoulder to help her rise. As Maria walked over to clear their plates, Mrs. Patterson smiled at her warmly. "Thank you for everything today, Maria. You've been a bright light in our day." Maria smiled back, grateful for their kindness. "It's my pleasure. I hope you have a lovely evening." When the couple had finished paying, Mr. Patterson handed her a small envelope. "For you, Maria," he said, his voice raspy but filled with genuine appreciation. Maria looked at the envelope in confusion. "Oh, you really didn't have to." "We insist," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "Take care of yourself, dear." With that, the couple left the diner, and Maria stood frozen for a moment, holding the envelope in her hands. It wasn't unusual for regular customers to leave a tip, but something about this felt different. As she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. Inside was a check made out for an amount that made her catch her breath, enough to cover several months of bills, the car repairs she desperately needed, and a little extra to give her a much-needed break. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she held the check in her hands, disbelief and gratitude mixing in her chest. It was more money than she had ever received in one tip in her life. But more than that, it was the thought behind it. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson had no idea how much this would change her life. Maria sat down at one of the empty booths, staring at the check, her hands trembling. She had helped them, yes, but she never expected anything in return. Yet here she was, staring at an unexpected gift, a tip of a lifetime. The next morning, when she arrived at work, the manager told her that the Pattersons had left a message. They had passed on a final request, to use the money to pay it forward, to help someone else in need. Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest as she realized that this generous couple had not only changed her life, they had reminded her of the power of kindness, of the simple act of helping others, and of the unexpected gifts that life can offer when you least expect them. From that day on, Maria paid it forward. She used a part of the money to help a struggling family at the diner and donated some to local charities. The rest she saved for her children's future. And every time she thought about that moment, she couldn't help but remember the elderly couple who, through their own generosity, taught her the true meaning of kindness.